Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Perspectivity. In this episode, we're going to walk through the life experience of Giselle. Now you're going to notice right from the beginning of this episode that it gets heavy. Right before we shot this episode, she asked us, "Are you ready for some heavy shit?" And we invited her in to tell us all of her life experience in whatever way she possibly could. And I can tell you, it does get heavy. It gets emotional. We do talk about rape, and we do talk about violence, and we do talk about what it's like to feel really distraught about your life story and what brought you into this world. And at the same time, we learn about meaning and courage and overcoming that and incorporating those tough experiences into a life story that empowers you to not only create a better life for yourself, but for people around you. This is a heavy episode. I invite you to stay curious and really sit with this episode because there's so much that we can learn from Giselle here. Thank you. Stay curious.
So, I instinctually want to start with my mother's story because it contextualizes the role that she played in my life. Um, so, my mom was born in Paris and she's Chilean. My whole family is Chilean. And the reason that she was in Paris is because her dad was a dean of physics in Chile, and he was blacklisted as a leftist during the Pinochet dictatorship. So they fled the country. They went all over Europe, but they were in Paris when my mom was born. She was there till she was 5. When she was, I think, like 3 or 4, she was hit by a car. She suffered brain damage. She permanently damaged the part of her brain responsible for memory. She had to kind of relearn the ABCs, who her family was. And then they moved back to Chile, and the dictatorship was still going on. And so, growing up, as you can imagine, her parents were under financial duress, psychological duress. Her dad couldn't get work anywhere. And her mom was very abusive to her. And she had an older brother, and her mom would set her brother against her physically and psychologically. She grew up, when she grew up, she was part of the underground resistance. She watched friends of hers get set on fire in the streets. Her dog was killed by the state police. She literally risked her life every day in this movement against the dictator. So in her house, it was a warfare. Out of her house, it was also a warfare. And then when you couple that with, the early trauma that she suffered, her parents really made her believe that she was kind of like permanently disabled for the rest of her life. Whether that's true or not, I don't think it's true. But she really believes that. So she was in her late 20s when she was dating this guy. His name is Ed. And she was raped by her boss during this time. And she became pregnant, and she wasn't sure if it was Ed's or her boss's. And even though Ed knew, she was open. This is, the story of events as I was told. Even though she knew, or he knew that it might not be his, he still wanted a kid. And he was like, come to the US, I'll provide for you. He just kind of painted this like picket fence Labrador dog like story. Ed signed the birth certificate. He's my dad. And then they later learned he's not my biological dad. And so she came to the U.S. with me in her arms as a infant, just really believing in the American dream, right? And of course, you know, there's this saying like, no matter where you go, that's where you are. So of course she didn't escape all of her like psychological baggage. It just kind of followed her, and she found out that my dad. So I call him my dad, even though he's not my blood dad. He's my dad. Um, they had a really tumultuous relationship. He definitely wasn't the provider that he painted himself as. Um, he kind of set, this is according to my mother again, with a grain of salt, but he kind of set his family against my mom, which makes sense because my mom was problematic, had a lot of problematic behavior. And so yeah, they had a violent relationship. They divorced when I was 4. My mom was always so intent to keep her children by her side, even though she wasn't very capable of providing for us. So I like my early childhood is in like women's shelters. Um, and then she would kind of fall into like relationship after relationship, and the guys would like provide for her and her kids. So yeah, I have like a, I feel like I've repressed most of my childhood, and the memories that I have are not happy ones. And I just remember like my earliest memories are like my mom just like sobbing and me not understanding why. She just was very depressed and really struggled with mental illness growing up, when I was growing up. Um, and when I was 14, she started to get really abusive. She was physically abusive, emotionally abusive. My dad was not much better, but he never got violent with me. It was just all like psychological. Um, and yeah, I felt like a burden growing up. And I felt like I was constantly trying to balance like the toll that my existence held towards my parents, if that makes sense. Um, so like me knowing that I was the product of rape made me feel like I needed to be this like extraordinarily good force in the world in order to offset that. Um, so when I was 15, like the abuse kind of peaked, and I was suicidal. I was failing out of school. Um, and I think my mom knew that she had to do something dramatic or that I was gonna die. And she sent me to Chile to live with my aunt and my uncle. I lived there for a year. And that was a really cool experience for me. Um, my aunt placed a lot more structure in my life than I had had up to that point. I was kind of like, it was like my mom was like arbitrarily extremely angry with me, was always kicking me out of the house, but I never had any like, you know, like rationale behind why she was angry, you know? So I never had an opportunity to learn about, you know, things that mattered to her, I guess. Um, and I was able to see a healthy relationship by seeing my aunt and my uncle interact, and I realized that not all relationships are like tumultuous and, you know, like a bomb. Um, and it was there also that I started to explore my spirituality. I was baptized Catholic as a baby. I grew up going to Christian schools. When I was 14, something clicked in my head. I guess like just like my autonomy and my self-awareness, and I was just like, I don't think any of this is real. So I started to read about all the different religions out there, and I really liked Buddhism, and Buddhism helped me cope through everything that I had gone through. It just offered kind of a way to uh, a way to process in a healthy way. So yeah, I feel like I just kind of like floated through life in this like very bohemian way because I wasn't home very often up until that point. But then when I was home, she was like so angry at me all the time. And then when I went to my aunt's house, it was like, you have to be home by 9 o'clock and make your bed and shit. You know what I mean? But she didn't scream at me. So then I wanted to stay in Chile, and my dad did not want me to. And I moved back, and life was still the same as I had left it, you know. And my stepdad, actually, who I'm moving in with soon, I moved back from Chile into that house, and they were arguing all the time. And finally, he had had enough, and he was like, "Get the fuck out of my house." He put a restraining order on her, and he's like, "Your children can stay, but you have to go." And like I said, my mom was always, that was the one overriding theme, was like, my children are by my side. So even though my mom had no income, she had no savings, she did not want us to stay there. And that's something that I resented her for a long time. And we were essentially homeless. We moved into like the garage of this family's house. It really, really sucked, as you can imagine. And then they had enough of us, and then we had to scatter. It was me, my brother, and my mom. And we each, you know, just did what we could to get by. I ended up staying with a lot of just kind strangers that wanted to help out. I stayed with my psychology teacher for a bit. I'll never forget that moment where I was in psychology class, like on the verge of tears, not knowing where I was going to live, like tomorrow. And she pulls me out of the class. She's like, "What's wrong?" She listens to me. She's this tiny little old lady, Catholic lady. And it was just like, there wasn't even time. She didn't even need to think about it. She was just like, "You're coming to my house." And her kindness just impacted me so thoroughly. And I was just like, this is who I have to be in my life, you know, like a compelling force. And so I think that's been a theme in my life, is just like very kind people in my childhood helping me out, seeing what I was going through, and inspiring me to be like them. And yeah, so I moved around a lot. I moved around maybe like 16 times in 2 years, 3 years, something like that. And in a way, I feel like it made me really adaptive. It made me really open-minded to different ways of life. And also, I think I kind of gave a lot of thought as an adolescent to how to be likable, because it was a survival mechanism. And what else? I went to community college after high school. I studied liberal arts. I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I took an economics class and I really loved it. And then I decided that I like math, and money was this thing that like eluded my family, and they were like constantly complaining about how there's no money, and like taking care of you is so expensive. And I guess I made that my narrative, and I was like, if I'm gonna learn something, it's going to be money, and I'm going to make it work for me and not against me, and then I'm going to help other people make sure it works for them and not against them. So I went to Rutgers Business School. I studied finance. I took some time off from college because I got offered a full-time job being a housing advisor after Hurricane Sandy happened in New Jersey. So I was a housing advisor. I helped people get like grant money to rebuild their homes. And then went back to college. My internship was in San Francisco. I interned at BlackRock, which is the largest asset management firm in the world. And that was actually a really hard summer for me because I had just gotten out of a very toxic relationship that I was in for like 3 years. And my best friend was supposed to go with me to San Francisco. And at last minute, she got cold feet, and her way of dealing with it was not the best. And she was just like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going. And then we just like stopped talking. So like that summer was like one of adventure and exploration, but also of grief and loss. I really loved just like experiencing all the wackiness of San Francisco, all the different kinds of people. I walked a half hour to work every morning, and I lived in Tenderloin, which is like the like sketchiest, cheapest area. I lived in like a literal like closet, slept in a closet, and it was so cool because I like would walk past homeless people like shooting up at like 6 in the morning, and then walk to like the financial district, which is like literally San Francisco financial district, like one of the richest areas in the world, you know? So I don't know, that dichotomy is super interesting to me. And Black Rock was like a culture shock to me. You know, I was like a little kid I grew up in like a ghetto small town. And being around these people who like, I don't know, like did Ironman for fun and like skied in the Alps and shit. I just did not connect with them. So I did not get a return offer. And what else? Graduated from college. During college, I was trained as a peer counselor, and I worked for their suicide hotline for 2 years. And I found that to be very rewarding. And after college, I worked as a financial advisor. I wanted to, you know, like be a financial counselor, basically. And I picked the wrong company. It will not be named. But it was basically one of those like burn and churns where they like hire a bunch of incoming freshmen, and they like, you know, amp them up to bring in new business, but then they don't pay out for it. And I was broke. I was working for free essentially for them for a year while working 2 other jobs. And that's another thing, is like I've had so many different kinds of jobs in my life, and like I'm not ashamed to admit that I've, you know, have done so many different things. Like I've been a server, and a go-go dancer, and I don't know, like a shot girl, bartender, along with financial advisor. I sold chocolate, like just random shit. Just trying to get by. And I realized that it was just like, you know, the income situation was just untenable, and quit that. Worked for a bank as a temp. Did really menial work, but like did it to the best of my ability, and made friends with my boss, and they let me go at the end of the contract. They like didn't have the resources to hire me full time, or so they said, and I got a remote job, working in like logistics for clinical trials, and it was around that time that I met Miles. It's a really cool story about how I met Miles. So I go to the Philadelphia Folk Festival every year, and this past year was my 10th year. I'm like obsessed with it, and I have basically like, you know, your family, your chosen family. I have a chosen family that I camp with every year. And one year he was in California, but his dad and his 2 brothers were camped next to our campsite. And like I just went up to them and was just like, hey, you want a beer? You know, like feel free to come hang out with us. And they stuck around, and then they showed up the next year and the next year, and then like they came like 4 years or something, and I became really good friends with his dad, and he was still in California. And then his dad invited all of us to his house in Virginia for like a spring break, and Miles was back from California, and that's how I met him. I convinced him to move to Philadelphia. We lived in Philadelphia together for a couple years. And then the pandemic hit, and it was around that time that I started getting into coaching also, because I just realized, like, I've been reading so much about how to self-improve and psychology and meditation and Buddhism, and I was able to, like, transform my pain and my suffering into, like, happiness, and I just wanted to share that with other people. And so because of the pandemic, like I said earlier, we moved to Virginia. And I'm very much, like, I love nature, but I'm a city girl. Like, I love the opportunities that a city has and the buzz and the variety and all the people. And I'm definitely someone who derives energy from community. And it was a culture shock to come from that, to hear, like, on top of, we're not supposed to see anyone because of the pandemic, but then even if I wanted to see anyone, I didn't really have anyone to see aside from him and his family and his few high school friends. And I realized that I didn't feel truly seen here. I felt like I was, Miles' sidekick. I was like his girlfriend. I wasn't Giselle. Even, it's actually crazy, like, I feel like today I had a breakthrough moment because his mom never invited me by name and never called me to invite me. It was always just like, Miles, are having this thing, like, bring whoever you want, you know? And so I really struggled because I am such a personable person, and, like, that's what I need in return. And I just felt invisible. And I definitely think that it brought out some, attachment wound issues, of feeling neglected. During the pandemic, I found painting as a way to pass the time, and, like, I adore painting. I liken it to, like, feeling like you're, like, underwater for too long and then you come up and you breathe. That's painting to me. It brings me tears. And I started making music with him and his brother, and we made a bunch of really fun music. So there's definitely some positives that came out of the pandemic, but again, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, again, a lot of exploration, a lot of inner adventure, but also a lot of grief and loneliness. Yeah, so I mean, like we were talking about before, like, this has taught me a lot about when I need to adapt to the circumstances versus when I need to change the circumstances. I really, really tried to make it about me, and I, like, finally came to the conclusion that, like, there's a focus on, it's very individualistic here, this culture. That's how I interpret it. I'm very collaborative, and I'm just not around people that want to share that with me. And that's been really, really hard for me. But I've been in event planning, and in Philly, I was the president of a suicide prevention nonprofit, and I held these fundraisers with a team of people, and I was really fucking good at it. And when I got here, I stopped doing that for a while, but then I recently met someone who, was just on the same page as me, and we threw a retreat, my first wellness retreat, and we did it here, and it was really, really nice. It was, like, one of the happiest days of my life. So, like, I find these pockets where I am making the best of it and, like, life is really good. But on the whole, like, there's just so much more for me than this town. And I really want to travel the world. I have a remote job, so I'm able to. And I'm going to Germany in like 2 weeks. And I'm going there for a month. I'm going to go to Amsterdam. I'm going to go to Belgium. And I decided that I'm going to save some money and live in Jersey for like 9 months. And then in September, I'm going to embark on a 6-month trip and go to one country per month. And yeah, we'll see what the rest of life has in store for me.
What do you think of the American dream? Your mom came here with an idea that it was going to do a lot. And honestly, when you said that, that hit me very deep. The first thought that went through my head, I recently took my own survey and I had to identify how well I feel like my life story aligns with what's expected of an American's life story. For the first time, I realized it aligned extremely well. It made me feel good. I had an idea of the American dream and I've lived it, and I couldn't believe it. But then I heard your story, but all I thought was, as an American, we need to make this a place where that dream is live and real.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the American dream concept?
I think that I think in America there is more social mobility than a lot of, and financial mobility than in a lot of the rest of the world. But I don't think it's truly a place where poor people get rich. You have to have money to make money. For example, I was homeless at 15. I make almost $100,000 a year now. That would not have been possible if my aunt didn't shell out thousands of dollars for my college. I think of other people, there are some people that really inspire me. For example, I have a friend who started out like owning a pizza shop, and now he owns like several multi-million-dollar businesses. But he had an entrepreneurial dad who gave him that first pizza shop, So I think like there's no such thing as rags to riches without someone along the way injecting capital into that. Or whatever it may be, even a safety net, right? Like, and that safety net comes with affluency. So, for example, someone like Miles, he comes from an affluent background. He could very well, like, rough it right now and pursue his dream to be a musician. But he knows that if he fails, he's got a steady home to go back to. And his parents would never let anything really bad happen to him, and they can afford that luxury, right? So while America is definitely great, I love America, I don't really believe in this, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
I'll ask a very challenging question.
Mm-hmm.
If a common mantra is pull yourself up by your bootstraps, what do you think the real mantra is?
Of America?
Mm-hmm.
Work smarter than everyone else if you want to be somebody.
I heard a theme of competition built within that. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, we live in capitalist America, 100%. Mm-hmm. It's a competition.
Thinking about it as being a competition, how do you parse that with your deep need for collaboration and your deep desire to have community?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think the best teams bring out a competitive spirit. It's not so much like, let me step on your head to get above, right? Although I'm sure some people interpret it that way. But for me personally, it's like, let's push one another to be the best possible version of ourselves, and may the best man or woman win.
What do you think should happen to the people who don't win?
what should happen to them. I don't think anything should happen to them. That's such an ambiguous question. I think we as a society should be held responsible for those of us who are struggling. I think a society is only as strong as our weakest. In my version of reality, I'm competitive and I'm also supportive. I want other people to succeed, but I also want to be the best version of myself and see where that takes me.
So it's like you can compete to do well and even bring out the best of yourself, and at the same time, you can provide support for the people who aren't winning that competition.
Yeah.
That safety net that you mentioned someone in your life experiences that allows them to go push themselves to be their best and not win in the competition. It would be better if we had that for, am I reading this right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like give people the opportunity to shoot for what it is that they love. And I think that makes rational sense as a society, because if we allow other people to do that, if we give them the opportunity to do that, you're going to have the hardest working people in society if they're shooting for what they love, and that's going to drive innovation and happiness and all that good stuff. So yeah, I feel like I don't really like where we're going as a society right now, where we tend to see social safety nets as like a suck, right? This succubus from, I don't know, people that are harder working, more capable, whatever. I feel like you may be talented, you may be intelligent, you may be hardworking, you may be all of those things, but when it comes down to it, the only thing that separates you from the people that are less capable is luck. You just happen to be born in the right place at the right time, and those abilities happen to be fostered.
What do you think, as a society, what do you think America could do over the next 10 years to improve, to become its best version of itself?
It has to be like a profound cultural shift away from production and consumerism. I think we all should journey inward. I think we should all develop more self-compassion and awareness, and I think that is going to ripple externally and create a better society, and it would resolve, like climate change, for example.
In the Reagan era, they called it trickle-down economics. What I just heard is trickle-out economics. It's just out of us will come the good. That's really beautiful. I'd like to ask you, the current state of your life, if we were peering into the book, we're reading it right now, this is the current part of your life, what would you title this chapter right now that you're in, and why?
I'm going to title it Returning to Self. I'm returning to my community. I'm returning to being single. I'm returning to my priorities.
What is a core value or life lesson that you aspire to live your life by?
A core value of mine is compassion, because to me it is the essence of goodness, and it improves the lives of everyone. A core value of mine is authenticity, because it is the essence of truth, and it provides clarity and joy.